Welcome to the Reach1 weekly podcast, and this week we're talking about Victorious Victim and the start of that series, and so we'll kind of get into our discussion on that.
Right.
And one thing is that the reason why we titled it Victorious Victim is because in our society, it's kind of in to see yourself as a victim.
Oh, yeah.
To feel like you're the victim of whatever. You know, there's some serious victims, victims of
absolutely.
sexual
man.
abuse or
Yeah.
or domestic
Especially around
abuse.
the world. I think we get a little shelter. I mean, it happens here, but we're a little sheltered even in our country of what goes on. But yeah.
Yeah, but we see ourselves as victims all the time. And the truth is, there was only one pure victim, and that was Jesus. He's the only one that was completely innocent.
Yeah.
But also, the thing that we need to bring out in that is when you see yourself as a victim, you're really bringing on a pity party to some degree, and it's impossible to reach others. So with reaching one for Christ, when we're playing the victim card, it just makes that much more difficult because who wants to be a victim?
Right. And
so if you want to attract them to you when you're a victim, they don't say, hey, I want to be just like that. I want to be a victim too.
That's the guy I want to follow.
Yeah.
Would it be overreaching to say, I'm going to go, I think somewhere with this, but that it's almost become virtuous in our society?
Yeah.
Like there's some virtue
there is
to being a victim. And I think it's safe to say also that sometimes when you're trying to what's the word I'm looking for? Like, you know, when you're trying to share your faith with other people, you can be your own biggest stumbling block.
Yeah.
And it seems a little just, I don't know what the word is, but why throw an extra thing in there to stumble over when it's something that is in there? So, we not being a victim is, it almost is like an art form. Like you almost have to cultivate it. Like it's something you got to be aware of. Maybe not cultivate, but be aware of that. Man, do I have a victim mentality towards this person wronged me? Well, they may not even known. Like, you know, I've had times before where I've been upset with somebody because of something they did to me, and I don't even know if they knew who I was. So, I mean, I wasn't a victim of anything because I just got my feelings hurt a little.
Well, and the other thing is the waitress at the restaurant didn't wake up that morning thinking, you know, I hope I can stick it to Jeremy Munden today.
This guy.
You know, and sometimes when something happens, our food's not fast enough getting there, or it's the wrong order. We almost treat her as if she woke up, this was your plan all along.
This social
media.
This is what you
wanted to do.
The social media restaurant martyrs.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden, you know, I'm going to make sure nobody goes to this restaurant. Well, you know, people have bad days.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want someone to come in my worst Sunday of the year.
Yeah.
You know, that I'm having a bad Sunday because technology won't work, which tends to be the bane of my existence these days. But, you know, if technology doesn't work and then they run off and write a scathing report because I just happen to have we talk about that with raising kids, you know, giving kids the space to just have a bad day.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's still consequences to behavior. I'm not saying, but sometimes you just have a bad day.
You do.
And you're not a victim of some plot of, you know, cosmic. The world's not against you, I think is kind of, I mean, it is, but it is, you know what I'm saying. So,
well, and what we want to bring out in this too, that I think is so interesting is even though Jesus had every right to wear the label of victim, he chose not to.
Right.
And you know, especially when you look at the cross, I don't want to steal too much from my Easter devotion of that week, but that Jesus, instead of being the victim, he thought about other people.
Right.
He thought about taking care of his mother.
Yeah.
He thought about the thief on the cross,
right.
The one that did ask for
right.
forgiveness, you know, and he thought about everybody else when he said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And you can say, oh, yeah, well, I can't do that. That was Jesus, and he was perfect. Well, Stephen, just a few days later, is going to run through basically the same thing.
Absolutely.
And he's going to pull it off, too.
Absolutely.
And I think when we don't see ourselves as a victim, we're more like Jesus, but we also handle the situation better. It's just a better way to live.
Oh, it is.
Whether you're a Christian or not, it's a better way to live.
Yeah. So. I can tell you what I like with the depictions. I'm not a huge fan of like the Passion or even the Easter experience where they show the scourging, and I just don't have a stomach for gore and violence. And so anyhow, watching the Easter experience when they get up to Golgotha and the way they depicted that of, you know, they have to like wrestle the one guy onto the cross.
Yeah.
And with Jesus, he basically crawls onto the cross. And I thought that was it's
that
subtle.
Picture is pretty
right.
cool.
I don't even know if subtle's the right word, but there's some nuance to it that you can pick up in there. Like, oh my goodness, he willingly did this. He allowed himself to be a victim.
And I don't know if that literally happened, but it did happen.
Yeah.
I mean, that he allowed himself.
Right. And
whether he did it that way or not, it's a good description.
Right. Because I don't know where I've gotten in the argument, but that argument of like, well, if he was God, why did he allow that to happen type of thing? Or he couldn't save himself. He couldn't. And I think there is some understanding. And he kind of even, said it himself. And even Satan knew when he tempted him, if they didn't want him to get hurt, there were legions of angels, warriors that would have made sure nothing was going to happen to him.
Yeah.
And, you kind of wonder, there's a little bit of a graphic picture that you can put in your head of this army of angels at the ready, that as soon as he said the word, it could have been over. And that's quite a picture to paint. I don't know if I'm jumping to conclusions.
In fact, there's a great hymn that if you've been in, I don't know if you've been in church long enough to know that, but there's a hymn called "He Could Have Called 10,000 Angels." And we don't sing that anymore because it's an oldie.
I know, but 10,000 Reasons.
Yeah, that's right.
I know that song.
But and if you think about that, that's true.
Right.
And he could have done that.
Right.
And he could have, and I see them as being ready.
Yeah.
I mean, for one thing, they're always ready for what God's telling them to do. But I just see them being ready and even anxious, maybe even disappointed that they weren't called out for that. Right. And so he definitely could have.
So then leading up to Easter, we're going to walk through and look at different people within the story around the crucifixion of Jesus and how basically Jesus was a victim of these different people. Is that fair to say?
And their unique sins.
Yeah.
Which this week is envy.
Right.
And it's interesting because Pilate is the one that says, or that it records that Pilate realized that they delivered Jesus because of envy.
Right.
And it's interesting with such little information, he could come to that conclusion.
Yeah. I find it interesting. I don't know if this is a jump, but, if people talk about, well, the government put Jesus to death, Rome could have cared less.
Yeah, they didn't
He
care.
wasn't killed
In fact,
because...
they only went ahead and killed him because they really didn't care.
Right.
Okay, if you really want to kill the guy, fine.
We're just going to kill somebody. We don't care. But you take the equation of Rome, like the state didn't put him to death because he was a threat to the state. He wasn't a threat to them. They could have cared less. He was some nowhere rabbi and this small backwards providence with these weird people who only worshipped one God.
Yeah.
And so I think that you need to, we don't want to overplay Rome's role in it. I don't know if I need to say we don't want to downplay it, but I definitely don't want to overplay it. And especially this week it comes to light that it was the religious leaders of the day, which has always struck me that these guys knew the scripture better than anybody else. Yeah. They should have seen the Messiah coming. And that's always kind of, I don't know, bothered me is the right word, but it's made me just wonder, how did they, it scares me a little bit because, I don't want to be one of the ones that misses it. I should know the New Testament really well.
We basically have the positions of the ones that I preached about Sunday.
Right.
Yeah.
So staying humble and the sons of Issachar being able to, having eyes for the times, knowing what to do, but being able to recognize that this is the Messiah. It's always perplexed me that these guys couldn't see it. And instead of seeing it, they got jealous and envy. And
actually, I think in many ways they did see it better than the disciples because after the crucifixion, they're the ones that said, hey, that guy said he was going to come back in 3 days.
Yeah.
Let's make sure that doesn't happen. The disciples didn't do that. They didn't go back and say, Jesus said he's going to come back in 3 days. Let's see if he does.
Right.
They didn't, but the religious leaders understood. So in some ways, they got the message better than the disciples. It just went through the wrong filter.
That's got to be, because I'm amazed, the difference between Nicodemus. You have Nicodemus and even Joseph that was that helped prepare Jesus' body. You have the difference between them and Caiaphas.
Yep.
And, I'm going to guess Nicodemus and Caiaphas were kind of on the same level as far as prominence in there. But by all appearances, Nicodemus became a follower, right? He kind of stepped down from his position and humbled himself. Caiaphas, on the other hand, he showed a lot of wisdom in his statement. Hey, if he's really the guy, there's nothing we can do to stop it. So, let's not fight against this. It'll either go away or he's he's the Messiah. And unfortunately for him, I think it proved true.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just the stark difference in how they handled receiving the news, because they both were smart guys.
Yeah.
They both were followers of Yahweh, of God, of Judaism, however you want to do that. It's just one really got it more so than just an assent of, okay, yeah, he's the Messiah. One, he really took it deep into his soul and went through, that pattern that we see of believe, confess, repent, be baptized, and follow Jesus. And the other one just seemed to kind of relish his position and stay there. So interesting.
Yeah, well, and it is one thing that came up in the scriptures that we looked at Sunday that I kind of tend to forget, because you feel like all of the leaders, with the exception of just like a Nicodemus and a couple like that, rejected Jesus. But that's not true, because it talks about when he raised Lazarus from the dead, it says many among the leaders followed him. Then it goes on to say, basically they believed, but they liked the praise of men better than the praise of God. So they knew what they needed to, and some of them did come. We don't have the details about that, but Nicodemus is probably the biggest name, but Joseph of Arimathea was in the same boat.
Yep.
And the only reason we know about him is because he buried Jesus' body, or gave him the tomb. But it's kind of interesting. And also, we didn't say this at the beginning too, that looking at the final events leading up to the crucifixion and resurrection is what Christianity stands on.
Right.
That's everything.
Right.
And so it's important to take a look at that too. But these guys, they knew. I really believe they understood better than anyone. And a few of them, to the point where they said, he is it.
Right.
But even a couple of those that believed he was it couldn't bring themselves to follow.
See, that's what gets me, because, let's relate that to right now, the second coming of Jesus.
Yeah.
If you realize, okay, this is Jesus, now I think it's going to be a totally different, from what the New Testament writer said, it's going to be a totally different second coming. You won't have I don't know anyways, an opportunity to deny, you're going to pray. Right. But how do you see this and understand this is the Messiah, this is the promised one? We've been waiting, it's been 400 years since God's talked to us, and this guy shows up in the scene, and I know he's the Messiah. How do you not follow him?
Yeah.
I can't wrap my head, and I'm being honest here, I'm not just trying to play it.
I don't know.
I can't wrap my head around that, because, and you pointed out there, man, they went through a lot to get him to the cross. That envy, they had to fight through. You talked about there was resistance. Rome didn't want to crucify him. You had, people he followed that followed him that would stand in the way. And I know there were other factors you pointed out that were kind of stood in the way of him getting to the cross.
He kind of secluded himself there. And I'd kind of forgotten about that too, that on some level, he secluded himself as well.
Yeah.
And it's just the whole thing is pretty interesting. But yet they were still, in spite of that, they pushed through it.
Right.
All of those obstacles. And it's even funny with going to Pilate. They knew they didn't have anything on him. Keep in mind, these are the religious leaders. These aren't barbarians.
Right, yeah.
Or even bad people, whoever those would be.
Right.
But these were religious leaders, people who basically had positions like we do, and they knew they didn't have anything to get him with, especially as it relates to Rome, so they made something up.
Right.
So, and it shows you that one sin kind of leads to others. And I actually think the primary sin with them, or at least the first sin, was envy. And then that leads to everything else, from lying and a lot of sins that they probably did not do regularly. Lying, I doubt that they were big liars.
Yeah.
But they got to the point where, you had to do this sin to cover up that sin. And it was just an ugly downhill run. But those guys, and it was all out of envy.
Yeah.
And I think I told you this, I'm not sure I've ever preached on a whole sermon on envy before. And it's kind of funny because in a couple months we're going to hit it again because we're doing the 7 deadly sins, and that's one of them. But envy, it is something that we all struggle with at times, hopefully not all the time. Yeah. And it's also, and I mention this at times too, it's also kind of an acceptable sin.
It is.
You're allowed to be envious. And when I say acceptable, I mean among
within
people.
the world.
Not God, but you're allowed to be envious. That's okay. If your neighbor buys a nice new truck, you're allowed to be envious of that.
Right. And they kind of want you to be. Like, it
they
feels,
do. That's the whole purpose a lot of times.
Yeah, and it's so easy to fall into.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see it at going to, just in the triathlon world, going to races. I really like my racing bike, but I'll go there and I look at the guy next to me. I'm like,
wow,
man, look at that rig, or somebody, and even like the shape some guys, and the how fast they're running or something. I'm like, man, I wish I could run that fast. And you kind of it starts to play in your head, and that can lead you if you don't check that thought.
Yeah,
I mean, that can lead to some dangerous places. You talked about like going to conferences and speakers.
Yeah.
And that can be something to where even, we have a shared thing of the CIY stuff, the youth events that I know you went to back in your youth ministry. I've been to a few of those. And you can find yourself wrapped up in that thought of, well, why am I not up on stage? I could do what this guy's doing, right? And then you miss the message.
Yeah, you do.
And it may be a fantastic message this guy's bringing and that you need to hear, but you've missed it because all you're sitting there thinking is, well, I could do this. Why am I sitting here with this bunch of kids and I could be up there on stage? And so you really got to watch where that takes you.
Yeah, and just to help those listening understand, I mean, that's basically for a youth minister, that's the pinnacle, is to speak at CIY.
Right.
That would be the ultimate.
Right.
And so when you see, and there is that tendency to say, well, I'm that good, even though I'm not. You tend to think that, and and sometimes there's guys, that, or else you'll say, we talked about this the other day, where you'll kind of say, well, of course that's a good sermon. They preached it 10 times during the summer, and they had all kinds of time to prepare for it. Let me see how they do preaching every week.
Right.
And that, although all of that is true, it can come from a heart of envy.
Right. Absolutely.
And if you're sitting there in the auditorium listening and you're thinking about all that, it is coming from a heart of envy.
And then you've got those disgusting guys who do preach every single week, and then you go see them at a conference and they blow you away. And you're like, how do you do all
Gary Johnson?
Yeah, like I can't even.
Kyle Idleman, Bob Russell, Dave Stone, all of those guys.
Yeah, I can't even manage a website and put together a lesson and feel like I'm doing it. These guys are. But I think what that really shows is just how easy that can sneak into your life, and can sneak into your thoughts, and so trying.
And
to
we
catch
all have
that.
our areas of envy. I mentioned too in the message about if those that when. And I don't even remember what sermon it was in a few weeks ago. We said over half the people don't like their boss, and I'd say most of the time that's because of envy,
right?
And they might think they're a jerk or whatever, but it probably starts with envy.
Yeah.
And then they look for ways to bring something else in. Yeah. And it's funny because a lot of times they're envious of the people that work for them because they don't have as much responsibility. And so we can all be envious, and so it doesn't just happen in our field, even though that was even the illustration from the New Testament. But
I don't know if this is too early to bring this in, but I had another thought on that as I was saying that I don't know, but sometimes that envy of yourself and your like past life or what, like you could look at what you could do 20 years ago and spend all this time like, man, I wish I was that guy still. I wish I could still do this. I wish I could still do that. And that might be at the heart of, I'm getting right into the prime age of the midlife, I was just looking at the camera.
Why you're doing all these?
That's exactly
triathlons?
Why. Well,
this is your midlife crisis.
Let's just confess. When we were setting this whole thing up, and I looked in the camera and I could see it in the computer, I realized a certain spot on my head was. So I'm headed to get hair plugs here.
Yeah,
so if you guys know anybody,
that just happened
right, like 5 minutes, well, however long we've been talking. But so if anybody knows any good hair plug people, please give me a call because I need either that or I got to shave the thing. But anyhow, we can start to, and even with the last year of all of this that we've been through the last year, it's very easy to sit back and be envious of Christmas last year because I was with my whole family. Maybe this year I couldn't, or envious of just that past.
Yeah.
And that can be really destructive. Not, I mean, I don't know where it falls on like a sin thing, but it's not healthy living. That's for sure. If all you're doing is living in, I should have done this, and I wish I could do this. I wish I could do. It's not even like regret. It's just, man, I wish those pants still fit.
Yeah.
Which that could be a weekly thing for for some of us. But
yeah. Well, plus that envy, when you look back to the other thing that makes it destructive, is that we're usually better in the past than we really were at the time.
Right.
I'm guessing that I wasn't as good an athlete when I was in high school and college as I think I was.
Really? Because man,
No,
you
you
told
just
me
go
a
ahead
few.
and believe what I
don't know,
tell you.
How many national championships was that you won? And
Yeah, that's easy to add up.
I mean, you were going to you were going to go to Ohio State, but they lost your
Yeah, I
tape,
think
like,
they lost my transcript.
Right, it was
Yeah.
something along those. The coach didn't send in your promo tapes.
It was their fault. Yeah.
Right, so
Yeah, it
your
wasn't
highlight
my
reel
fault.
got destroyed. And so,
But but when you look back,
Right.
you usually have, especially about yourself, you usually have a little better picture than was reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that just makes it even worse. So you're comparing yourself now to something that didn't even exist back then.
That's a great point.
That makes it kind of hard.
Yeah.
So you're being envious of something that never happened.
Right.
But yeah, it is. It is possible. I mean, covetousness kind of is similar, but it's possible to be envious of somebody else's marriage.
Oh yeah.
And I think social media promotes all of that.
Yeah.
Because you just put your best stuff on there.
Yeah.
And really what you're going after a lot of times is people to be envious, to say how awesome you are.
Yeah.
Man, boy, I wish I had such a great family, or I wish I had
was
such
this
a great
person.
marriage, or, you're putting that out there. And if you are putting it out there for that purpose, stop it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awful. But also, if you're looking at that and with envy, you probably need to figure out something else to do too.
It almost makes you wonder if it doesn't lead to some of the posts that are like, well, I'm so terrible at this, or I'm looking so old these days, because you're envious of something you're seeing. Right. And you're asking for someone, no, you're a great pair. You're a great, you put these things, kind of that, it's almost like a false humility.
Yeah.
Or what do they call it? A humble brag. Humble brag.
Humble brag.
Right.
Yeah.
You're humble bragging of,
Yeah,
look, he missed that layup, but he'll get, oh no, your kid's a great basketball, ball player, whatever. So you run into those things too, that envy can lead you down.
Yeah, and I really didn't think about how bad we are with social media, and envy is a big part of it.
Yeah, that's a big driver.
And
there's a lot of people make a lot of money off of it.
But it's the same way. You're being envious of something that doesn't even exist.
Right.
Because you're seeing this family or this person, their very best side, and maybe even a little inflated.
Yep.
And you're being envious of that. So it's not even a realistic picture.
Right.
It's sort of like girls wanting to look like the beauty pageant girls, or the models. Even what makes it to a magazine, although not to say those girls aren't beautiful, they are, but what makes it to the magazine is even better than they look.
Right.
And so you're comparing yourself to a false picture.
Yeah, that doesn't, again,
something that doesn't exist.
A false reality.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, go ahead.
I was just going to say what we said at the end about some things we can do about envy. But did you have something else?
No, I was
first?
actually going to transition to to
because
that end.
the first thing we said was to recognize its wickedness, and I think that's important, because with it being a forgivable or not forgivable sin, what is a forgivable sin, but acceptable sin. We tend to think those aren't as bad. Like telling lies, that's not as bad. Gossip's not as bad. But I think we need to recognize that it was actually envy. It looks like might have been the primary sin that put Jesus on the cross.
Yeah.
I mean, he died for all of our sins, but if you're looking for what physically got him there, it was envy. It started out with envy. And so I think for us to recognize this is an awful sin.
Yeah.
And Jesus could have done it because he didn't have much.
Yeah.
It tells us he didn't have a place to lay his head. So he didn't have much, but yet he didn't have envy. And if we can figure out a way to be happy for the other person, which we'll get to that in a minute, 'cause when we say pray for them, but I think we do have to recognize that it's awful. And just call it what it is. Because if you feel like it's not all that bad, then you're never going to do anything to get it out of your life.
Right.
So we need to talk about it being awful.
So we recognize the wickedness, then what?
Then it comes to changing our mindset, and I love the passage in Romans. It's a great one to memorize, but and it's great to memorize. And right now I can't think of it, so I'm going to have to look. Oh yeah, do not conform any longer to this pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. And the whole idea of changing.
Yeah.
That if we struggle with envy, there's a better way.
Absolutely.
And actually, it is one of the things where even if you're not a Christian, living a life without envy is a way better way to live.
It is.
And I'm not by any means saying you shouldn't be a Christian. I think you need to accept that incredible gift. But even if you don't, this message is for you, because if you can get rid of that envy, your life is going to be so much better.
Absolutely.
Because if you're envious, then they're always bringing home a nice car. They're always wearing nice clothes. I mean, you're always going to find somebody.
You're dragging around a weight.
You are.
You got something strapped to your, look like those old prison things with a big ball shackled to your ankle.
Yeah, because even if you
chain,
even if you get the car you want, there's going to be somebody else that has one a little nicer.
Yeah.
Maybe it has more stuff on it, or next year's model.
Right. I've noticed that with iPhones. Every time I buy an iPhone, it's like a month later they release the newest one. I'm like, oh, man.
Well, and they even work on that, because I don't know if they still have this, but my dad was on a plan where he probably got hosed financially, but then you get a new iPhone every time one comes out.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be envious of everybody else, because you're going to get that new iPhone.
Yeah, right.
Of course, you might as well just poke a hole in the bottom of your bank account and let the money flow out.
Apparently, Steve Jobs' estate needs more money or something. Oh. Not that I'm envious.
Yep.
I'll stick to the eBay refurbished. I like that.
It's a good way to do it.
Absolutely.
Yep. But then maybe the best thing to do is pray for your competitor.
Yeah.
And I liked the illustration. I wish I'd come up with it, but I actually saw it in another sermon of praying for the people. Yeah. When you go to a conference or something and you see somebody that's good, if you've prayed for them to, Lord, give me a message today.
Yeah.
And then if it's good, you're not saying, well, I could do that. You're thinking of what can God do in me through that.
Absolutely.
And to pray, if you're envious of your boss, pray for him.
Yeah.
And it's just hard to keep that envy if it's an answer to your prayer. If that person has success and you're praying for good things. Now, don't pray for terrible things to happen to them.
Right.
But when you're praying for those good things to happen, then it's hard to be envious of them.
So that my ears really perked up when you brought that one up. There's a guy named Ryan Hall who's a marathoner, and I think he might have been the first American to break an hour in the half marathon, and for a while was like the Boston Marathon record holder. I mean, he's a legit dude. And he ran for a while. He got injured a bunch, but now he's like a power lifter. So he's gone from running to
marathoning to powerlifting.
Right, he gained
that doesn't seem like a natural
dude's gained
transition.
Like 60 pounds in muscle since he retired from running. Right,
that's amazing.
Right, his wife still runs marathons and stuff, but he's like this big hulking guy now. Anyhow, he's a Christian, and listening to to his story. There's a great documentary on Amazon called The 41st Day. And listening to his story, he talked about one of the things that kind of transformed him as a runner was he showed up to races and would pray for his competitors and wish them well, and made it a point to be serious about hoping they had a great day. And he said it just changed the way he viewed running, competing. He said he placed better, ran better, and he said it had to be an authentic, I wanted them to do better, and I wanted them to have a successful day, and I prayed for them to have a great day. And he said it wasn't, it didn't take anything away from me, and I wasn't praying that they would beat me, but I wanted them to have a great day, and it made me a better competitor. And I found that I was looser, I didn't have quite the pressure, and he said it made me a better runner. And I thought that was kind of cool that there was a tangible thing there, or example anyways, of somebody that did this, and it really made a difference in something they'd already did at a high level.
Yeah. And getting back to what we talked about at the beginning, it's hard to reach those people for Christ if you have terrible feelings about them.
And yeah, I think that's the biggest thing coming out of this. If you're just going to wish, because envy, ultimately leads to, we love to see people knocked off the top.
Right.
Right. I mean, there's just something in us. I don't know if you remember, there was a phenomena, it was a number of years ago, but do you remember the milkshake duck?
No.
Is that at all? Okay. Yeah, I think it was a milkshake duck. Anyhow, it was some Australian company, I think, put this thing out, right? And they said, hey, this is a lovable duck, and he loves milkshakes, right? And they put this out. And it got shared and everything. You know, it was this phenomenon. This is a great thing. Like a week after that, they put out the milkshake duck's a racist. And it was to show that, you know, people, as things went up and once something happened, man, everybody hated the milkshake duck. And so it was this whole, you know, they like to see people fall. It was a cool, like, sociological experiment that they did. It was just kind of a funny, you know, the whole thing about saying milkshake duck. But, you know, we live in a world that loves to see people fall.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you look at some of the people that have gained prominence and, you know, for a while they're really popular, and then there's a downfall that, you know, that you can go through artists and stars. I don't know why Justin Bieber comes to mind, but he rose up through all this fame, and then people just hated the dude. They wanted to see him. They wanted to see him fall away, or you see it with politicians and people who are media darlings, and then it comes out, well, they did this, this, and this, and you know, there was a video. It was within the last couple years of a little boy who was bullied at school, and you know, they put out a video of him crying about being bullied. And he got all this support and like got play on the late night TV shows and all that stuff, and the world loved him. And something came to light in like some relatives' social media feeds of some inappropriate posts and stuff, and all of a sudden the family was demonized. And it's amazing that, you know, that, and it's almost like a thing of envy, like, oh, we want you to fly high, like, but we don't want you to get too high, right?
Yeah.
We want to make sure we keep you in check. Don't get too high because then the rest of us look bad. And that's just, I mean, it's just envy that, you know, it causes you to, you know, if we really believe that Jesus's command was to love God, love people, it's hard to love people when you're envious of them and then plotting for their downfall. Because that's where envy naturally is going to lead you.
Yeah.
You want to, the same thing the Pharisees did, the religious leaders, the Sadducees did with Jesus.
Yeah.
They're envious of him. They plotted his downfall. And so we really need, if we're going to love people, and most importantly, if we're going to reach people for Jesus, and that's the whole point of doing our podcast. We want to encourage you, reach people for Jesus.
Right.
Man, you got to love them. You can't be envious of them.
Yeah, and I think for those of you who are listening to this, the thing to realize is that you need to find where that envy is in your heart.
Right.
I had mentioned sports teams because that's the easiest place to see it, but really that's not even that important.
We're all envious of the Bengals. Amazing run.
Everybody steals my Bengals jacket.
Right, or the Reds, and they're fantastic. No, that one won't.
Yeah.
I mean, Ohio State's had all their seasons canceled. I don't think everything's been like wiped out of the record books, so that doesn't count.
But so you can see it there, but I think what we need to do is see where I'm envious. And if it's at work, pray, do those things that'll help you get rid of that. Mm-hmm. If it's your neighbor, pray about it and do those things that'll help you get rid of that. But don't just think that's okay because nobody else knows about it, because God knows about it, and get that envy out of your life so you can start reaching them for Christ.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a great message. That's a great way to start this series, and really as we walk towards Resurrection Sunday, that's a good start.
Yeah, this Sunday's Judas, which that's always a
that'll be a fun one to talk about next week.
Yeah, that will be.
I got a lot of questions about Judas. So
yeah, me too. I don't know that we'll have answers, but we'll bring up the questions.
Yeah.
So
awesome. Well, very cool. So I'll get this out and posted, and I hope you guys enjoyed listening to it. We'll be back next week. We're a day late this week, but we'll be back. We'll be back next week.
Preachers meeting in Des Moines yesterday. That's why we
ate way too much food.
We did. Yep.
So, great. Well, have a good week, and
thanks for being with us.
Yeah, have a good one.